Welcome to The Work Within, where we have conversations about mental health and faith to help you live with greater connection and wholeness in your everyday life. The Work Within is a podcast of the Watershed Initiative, supporting the mental health needs of the local church. Thanks for listening. Welcome to The Work Within. I'm your host, John Lin, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Lee Tran and Laura Harrison. Welcome to the show, y'all. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I think is very relevant and important to all of us. What do we do when we have a bad day? So the title of the show is called When You Have a Bad Day, Just Fill in the Blank. So we're going to start with the two of y'all and see how you guys handle your bad days. So Laura, can you go first?
Yeah, I would say that normally when I have a bad day, I tend to withdraw. I'm more likely to pull back and kind of isolate a little bit. And then if it's a really bad day, it's very easy for me to get snippy and kind of like sharp with people. So I have to make sure I'm watching that and be willing to apologize if I do that. But the goal for me, if I'm having a bad day, is to really kind of self-reflect and see what's going on with me and why I'm getting sharp like that or why I want to isolate. How about you, Lee?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with the withdrawing part. I think you should actually ask my wife what I do because she probably knows better than anybody. But I would say that yes, I kind of go a bit recluse. And I think I tend to move into things that I feel like I can control a little bit more. And so I pour myself into things that I feel like I have more the ability to manage and get my hands into, like puzzles. I'm really big on puzzles. I also will pour myself into sports, which doesn't lean into like an area of control at all for me. It's probably more of an area of frustration, but it is something I will do a lot.
Your responses were a lot more nuanced and deeper than I was expecting. 'Cause I was just thinking when I have a bad day, I just eat, and particularly chips, greasy food or fried foods, or sweet things. I like to eat. I like to eat.
I think I'll pick that one up too. Then yeah.
Yeah.
I like to eat my sorrows away. Or, at a deeper level, I will also withdraw. I tend to withdraw, kind of just get inside my head or I guess try to just get busy with doing random stuff around the house that I normally wouldn't do because I just feel it gives me some sense of agency. So
Yeah,
I would
lists are a
imagine.
big thing for me. I tend to make a lot of lists if I feel like I'm very disorganized. Like when things are going bad and I need control, I'll have a list.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I have a whole to-do list. I'm like, okay, if I'm having a bad day, I'll just kind of pour myself into that. And yeah, that's my jam.
In which case, I would imagine our spouses probably like it when we have a dad. So we knock out the honey to-do list, right?
Yeah, when Lee talked about his spouse, I was like, my husband would say, "Oh, I just try to stay out of her way."
That's funny. So I mean, among those things that we could fill in the blank with, there are things like puzzles, making to-do lists, eating, watching TV, binging Netflix. I mean, on the surface, none of those things are bad things. They're natural things and ways to just sort of handle, a bad day. But the reason we wanted to talk about this conversation and have this conversation today is there can be a point when those things become a little more serious and they become more significant. And I was thinking about this topic because it's worth it to talk about when our bad days become excuses for bad behavior. And I've been guilty of this. When our bad days become excuses for bad behavior. And so, what kinds of bad behaviors am I referring to? And I don't say this in a judgmental way, just a way to kind of give us some labeling and classification. But I'm thinking about aggressive behaviors, when people have a bad day and they start to drive like a maniac, so road rage, or maybe you lash out to a child or one of your kids or a grocery store worker because you've had a bad day at work. Those are the aggressive behaviors. Then there may be abdicating behaviors. That's probably not, that's the word that came to mind. But like, I'm thinking about the behaviors where you had a bad day, so you just start to procrastinate. You start to drop the ball on things you said you would do. You maybe sulk. There might be behaviors of indulging. And so, the eating, the binge watching, at a more serious level, engaging in indulging your sensual desires. I think you guys referred to withdrawal. I mean, that's something I do too. Isolating behaviors, cutting off, distancing, stick on your earphones and just sort of block the world out. I think another one I was thinking about is escaping behaviors. So it's like, had a bad day, bad week. I just want to get out of Dodge. Let me go on a vacay. Let me escape into my thoughts or my fantasy world. So those are some things. I just made a quick list when I was thinking about behaviors I observed in myself or in other people. What would y'all add to the list, or what have you seen is most common as you're working with clients, as you're observing your own behaviors or others around you?
I mean, I think overspending is a big one for
Yeah.
sure, and definitely hiding in our phones or hiding in devices um, of any type, like whether it's going to the movie or going to getting out of your reality and getting into something that is different, right?
Yeah. That that's a good one. The compulsive behaviors is what came to my mind as you're saying that, Laura. Like there's, whether it's spending or eating, things that can soothe, those definitely come to top of mind. I mentioned earlier, control is one that I feel like I personally move into. And just as you guys are talking about it, I was like just realizing, like as you were talking about, Laura, going into our phones, there seems to be like the doom scrolling and getting into media as an escape. Also, though, I find it to be something that feels a little bit empowering, or like we have the semblance of control, like the idea of like how getting activated by news and media today feels like a very easy trap to fall into, right? Just getting into our
Yeah.
echo chambers, So
I think it also creates that ability to like be affirmed. Like if you start like looking and liking at all these depressive posts, basically your algorithm changes and all of your posts are affirming that. And then you're starting to get more and more of that same information. It's like, yeah, that, I understand why I feel this way. And it really can be a very affirming sometimes.
yeah, it's the illusion of connection and
Mm-hmm.
and community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes me think, my wife just told me about this post she saw on social media where the person was distinguishing between good dopamine or healthy dopamine and negative dopamine. And
Mm.
it was like unhealthy dopamine, porn; healthy dopamine, matcha. she
Matcha.
she she loves matcha. I thought that was pretty
Mm.
funny. So I do want to ask the listener, those who are engaging in this, watching our podcast, what's, just as a question of reflection, what's your go-to behavior or bad behavior? And again, no judgment there. It's not a question meant to point fingers. It's just to raise awareness. And I love, even over the course of the last several conversations, there are these themes we keep coming back to. And one of those is awareness, that there is no transformation, change. There is no progress, no growth without that first step of just awareness and getting curious. So we want to ask that question. I was thinking about how to frame this conversation, because it's not just about the behaviors or, let's just stop that bad behavior or whatever, replace it with something good. But how do we frame this in a deeper way? And I was thinking about how this is sort of an extension of that first conversation Leah, you and I with Durla had about pain and discomfort. And so how a lot of life and maturity is about learning to increase our comfort with discomfort. And so if we use that, maybe extend that conversation, I was thinking that my thesis, or the way I understand this conversation about bad days, is really how we deal with having a bad day is really about how we deal with negative emotion.
Mm.
How we deal with having a bad day, underneath that is, how do we deal with negative emotion? So would you guys agree with that, or what would you like to say about that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that when you think about having a bad day, usually you're at your least capable coping, right? And so bad days are going to expose how you learn to deal with pain, your strategies that you learn to deal with pain. And so, like, if you look at like mine, withdrawing, that a lot of times is associated with if I had a bad day when I was a kid, that wasn't necessarily met with like comfort. It was kind of like, oh, well, that's just too much. You just need to go to your room and figure that out, right? And so feelings weren't really safe. And so that may be one of those things where it's like when you look at how you cope with a bad day, it can tell you something about how you cope just in general. And when you're at that lower point, you're going to go back to a least capable coping mechanism. So it's not going to be as effective as if you were like staying on top of stuff, right?
You know, I agree. Thinking about the conversation we had earlier with Drilla, the idea in my mind really centers more around how we deal with the discomfort, and the uncomfortableness of these emotions. Now, we can call them negative emotions, but they're really just emotions that center around pain. And so moving into these spaces where we increase our tolerance. I think the analogy I gave before was thinking about like working out. Like there's a discomfort that goes into going to the gym, lifting weights. It's painful, but there's a purpose behind that, right? And building our tolerance to move into discomfort allows us the resilience that we need to be able to endure different seasons of life. And so I would kind of also think of it in that way too, in this context.
Yeah, I like on the feelings wheel that I have in my office, it has feelings when your needs are being met and feelings when your needs are not being met. There's no bad feelings there, they're just feelings, right?
Hmm.
And when you feel what people may term a negative emotion, to be curious about what need is not being met for me right there that's causing that emotion to come up.
Yeah, yeah, I like that
Hmm.
framing. The beyond just negative emotion, I think just think of it as uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
They're just feelings, right? They're emotions, and just being comfortable with them allows us to be able to expand our capacity better, right?
Yeah, I mean, even sometimes positive emotions can be uncomfortable. I know that, like when someone gives you a compliment,
That's right.
a
Yeah.
lot of people struggle with that, and they feel like, oh, they have to like trying to downplay it. The inner critic comes back into play.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah, I mean, typically, I guess negative can mean a couple different things. Like it's a value judgment, but I think typically when I'm talking about negative emotion, I was thinking more about, whether we experience pleasure from that emotion. Like it's an uncomfortable
Mhm.
emotion. It's a negative in that sense. Like I don't like that emotion. But I think you're so right too. I mean, it could be positive feelings. I mean, sometimes people make their greatest mistakes when they're on cloud nine. I mean, Elisha is a
Mm.
great example of that, right? He experienced all this great ministry, and then from the Bible, and then he hit this depression, and so that's really fascinating. So it's just I think that it's helpful for you guys to name the fact that it's just any emotion and how we deal with those, and each of us individually will experience different emotions, whether yeah, we'll experience different emotions and interpret them in different ways. You mentioned the feelings wheel, and I think, yeah, because you guys live in the therapist world and emotions, you talk a lot about that. Highlight what's a feelings wheel, and for those, for those that are maybe less familiar with the language of emotions, what are some of the more common emotions that come up that are quote unquote negative, or that that are more difficult for most people to process?
Do you have a feelings real handy, Laura, by chance?
I don't know. I was thinking, do I have one here? I don't know.
You could just
I'm at
find
my
that
home
online.
office.
Just Google feelings
Yeah,
wheel,
yeah.
ChatGPT.
If you
Yeah.
Google feelings wheel, it will pop right up. And basically, what it does is it starts with like core emotions like anger, sadness, happy in the middle, and then it gets more specific as it goes out. And the idea is to say, if I can identify that I'm angry, usually those middle emotions that are easy to identify, like anger, sadness, happiness, are like masking emotions. Like there's something deeper there. So you're trying to go a little bit deeper than just what we normally express. Like I'm angry because of what? I'm angry because I'm disappointed. I'm angry because I was rejected, and trying to see what is that deeper emotion. And that kind of helps you get a better understanding because anger is so big and broad
Right.
that you may not be able to actually like access what's actually going on with you. Because really the goal is to say in that reflection stage is what does it look like? What is the need that needs to be met? And so if I'm just angry, well, my need to be met is to be not angry. I mean,
Right.
so how do you do that? But if I know that my need is that I feel disrespected, okay, so where did I feel like I lost respect? Is that something that actually happened, or is that something that I'm perceiving? So kind of going in that direction.
If our listeners are familiar with the movie Inside Out, how they actually articulated that, right? Because in the very first movie, the child has these core emotions within her, and they are happy, sad, angry, right? It's the basic core emotions. I think every one of us come with at a very young age. They're simple, they're powerful, they're easy to understand. As we get older, we get another set of emotions too, more nuanced, right? Now we have shame and rejection and anxiety and fear, these more nuanced emotions that come with adult life, right? And so as a child gets
What a bonus.
right, you can't have them, right? But I think the way I describe it to my clients is that it functions like kind of like a color wheel, like we're talking about feelings book, like a color wheel, where you might start off with a certain set of primary colors. And you can paint with that, but the more you mix them and more you get into the secondary colors, secondary emotions, you can paint more vividly. You have better tools to be able to articulate what's going on within you. And for me, that feels like a very important ability to lean into negative or uncomfortable emotions, being able to know how to identify and label them. That's a whole thing. So that feelings wheel is really important because it gives us the vocabulary to identify with better precision what's going on within us.
That's really helpful. I like that idea of fluency in emotions. And I think because I've talked to men in particular, where it's like, well, I feel mad, I feel good, I feel okay, and it's like three emotions, right? And I've been there. I totally get that. So again, no judgment. But part of the maturing process is learning how to expand our vocabulary to describe the complexities of how we feel. Because I think, Laura, to your point, oh, I feel mad because I felt disrespected, is different than I feel mad because I'm disappointed, right? Those are
Yeah.
two different scenarios and situations. So I really like that. I was thinking about, I use an app called How You Feel. We'll put all these references in the show notes later. And it's an app where it gives me a daily reminder just to check in with myself. And it uses a 4-quadrant thing where it's like um, energy, where you feel energetic or less energetic, and positive or negative. And then from there, it has a whole constellation of emotions that help me sort it out. So it provides a nice on-ramp because it's simple at first, like, oh, am I feeling energetic, not energetic, happy or sad? And then from there, I can delve into a lot more different emotions of shame, disappointment, frustration, different things like that.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up this distinction between emotion and behavior, because I think what I hear you all saying is that the emotion itself is neutral, so to speak. It's not a bad or good thing. It just is. And we have to pay attention to that. And I think those of us who have grown up maybe in religious settings or church settings, I know for myself, there's a combination of both church and family. Like anger was like, anger's a bad thing. That's what I thought. And so I'm very struck, for example, by Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26. It says, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. And that's a quotation of Psalm 4:4, which also says, be angry and do not sin. And then it says, ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. That is fascinating. It's like the psalmist was a therapist, because I hear the psalmist saying, hey, being angry is okay. That itself is not a sin. It's what you do with that anger. And then the psalmist encourages ponder, get curious in your own hearts on your bed. Think about what is pissing you off and
Yeah.
get underneath there. That's cool.
Yeah,
There's ancient wisdom.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Lee, but that first verse, do you get that a lot in marriage therapy? Like, we have to resolve this right now because we're not supposed to go to bed angry.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, not a good idea to be arguing at 1:00 in the morning. Nothing good happens.
No.
Yes.
I don't think that was the intention of that verse.
We need to talk about this more, because I have heard that used, and it leads to a lot of problems.
Yes. So, yeah, they're like, so we have to really figure it out tonight. I'm like, maybe not. Maybe we just need to be reflective. But I think that kind of speaks to like when a lot of people first feel an emotion, they want to resolve the emotion. And a lot of times that means I'm going to like lash out, or I'm going to, I need to find the person and fix it, right? When really what they need to do first is regulate, right? And to really step back into like, first I need to make sure I can calm the emotion, address the emotion. I need to be able to name it. And then I have to regulate my body as I start to try and reflect on why I'm feeling that way. Because I think the easier thing to do is to try and get that emotion out of you and throw it onto somebody else. And you'll see that like babies do that. And I think that's what's really important is because like when you are acting that way, you are acting out of a child's state. Like to just, if, if a baby is hurt or sad or angry, they scream and yell and they get loud. And then sometimes you see adults do that. We throw tantrums. Even as a 50-year-old woman, sometimes I still might throw a tantrum, right? And so noticing, okay, I'm throwing a tantrum right now. I need to step back from where I am. I need to regulate my body. And then I need to be able to come back into that event or with those people, apologize for my behavior, and then move forward and try and do repair, right? But I can't just go from I'm feeling violated in some way to repair, because if I don't regulate, I'm going to continue to lash out, right?
Yeah, that's so good. The regulation piece, when you say that, Laura, what comes to my mind is the ability to access a feeling without it necessarily overwhelming you. Like just being able to understand it and be curious with it, almost as though you're trying to, yeah, like a regulator valve, like where there's a lot of pressure. If you don't have a release valve, there can be a lot of pressure that can make it feel like it's explosive, right? But somewhere in there, being able to access the emotion in a way that allows you to understand it a little bit better. Um, on that as well, I have described this process like a check engine light, where if you start off with like anger or anxiety, which we just got done saying are some of the first sets of emotions, the most powerful emotions that we get as young children, they function in my mind like a check engine light on your car. And if we are aware of that, we can be attuned to it. The objective isn't to just make the check engine light go away. It makes us curious, find out what's going on there, right? It should be, at least. And so the ability to access that feeling and to be curious with it, we're not trying to cover it up with a piece of tape or something like that to where it just goes away. It's telling us something. If we don't deal with it, it produces problems later on for us, right? And so to do that requires that emotional regulation that you're talking about, Laura, like the ability to feel it, to be aware of it, to access it, and then do something with that, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
very helpful. I want to say, like, because you guys use the terms regulation, which, I think again it's really helpful therapy speak. But for those who are not as familiar with it, the contrast we want to make is that I learned from people like yourselves is the contrast between being dysregulated and regulated. And I think, Lee, you offered a definition of that. So dysregulation is when I'm feeling the emotion, but it's overwhelming me. I can't get curious. I'm flying off the handle or I'm shut down. But if I can learn to feel the emotion and get curious about it, that's what regulation looks like. Is that?
Yeah, yeah. That's a good way to summarize
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. And naming the emotion helps with that a lot. Right. Because what happens when you get overwhelmed with emotion, you get down into the smallest part of your brain that's just trying to keep you safe, and you aren't able to think clearly. You're not able to regulate your emotions. You're not able to like be really logical. And so if you can start to access logic by forcing your brain into what am I feeling, and even looking at the a feelings wheel, it's so funny because like people will like feel like it's so elementary when you hand them that feelings wheel. They're like, oh, I don't really need it. They're like, oh, okay, because it forces your brain to get into logic. And so when your brain moves into that space, it's easier for your body to start to relax because now it's trying to solve a problem instead of just trying to like feel everything, right?
And you'll notice this too. If you've ever worked with kids, you've got kids yourself, like when a child is dysregulated and they're throwing a tantrum, right? The moment you can label the feeling for them and they feel like it actually, hits a spot for them, you can immediately see for them, oh, that's what it is. I feel understood now. And that you haven't even necessarily fixed anything or changed anything, but just being able to know what that feeling is does an immense amount to just regulate a person. So to Laura's point, labeling it, just being able to know it, increasing your vocabulary are all great ways to increase our level of regulation.
Yeah.
That
And
is
they'll tell you if you're wrong.
fascinating. Right, right.
They'll go, no, I'm not angry.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay,
That
are
is
you
so
frustrated? Are
fascinating.
are you sad?
I love that because it's actually very simple. You just think, oh, naming it, like that's all. I mean, you're not saying you guys are not saying that's all you do, but it's a
Mm-mm.
That's the
critical
first step.
first step.
Yeah.
And even the act of labeling it reduces the
Clutter.
disharmony, the stress, and
Yeah, it
brings.
takes a person from lower brain back into upper brain.
Yeah. Okay, that's really good. So now we're getting into some of the what do we do with this, and so let's continue this line of reasoning. So for our listeners who are like, okay, yeah, I do tend to get dysregulated, or when I have a bad day, I do this and that, and I know that's not super helpful. I want to do differently. What other advice? What would you like to say to those folks?
I was going to say one of the things I think that you should do is really try to identify the need. Try to identify the origin of that feeling, and then see if it's connected to anything else, right? Because a lot of times when you have that big feeling, there's this thing called borrowed emotion. So like something happens to me, like I get cut off in traffic, let's say. I get cut off in traffic, and some days I'd be like, "Oh, that guy must really be in a hurry. Woo, I'm glad he didn't hit me." Then other days maybe words I don't want to say on this podcast come out of my mouth. And so there's a difference. Like, why do I sometimes react here and why do I sometimes react here? And that would be what we call borrowed emotion, is because that violation at that moment hit another part of me that also felt violated in the past. And I bring all that emotion into this one. So I react bigger. Right. And so that's something to really be aware of. When your reaction is much bigger, then you have to get really curious about where does that come from? And once you get regulated, then you can start being curious about what else did I put into play there? What other memories or events were activated in me when that happened?
Yeah,
Now,
I
are you
like.
saying, Laura, that there's going to be, for example, let's say at work, my boss disrespects me, not you, Lee. Okay.
Mhm.
So someone
Where are you
disrespects
going
me.
with this, John?
And then I'm driving, I feel disrespected. So there's a borrowed emotion from the disrespect there.
Yes.
Is it that kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
connection? Or is it just,
yeah.
or could it also just be like, I was disrespected in situation A. In this situation, I felt disappointed. And now I'm just bringing all that together.
It
Do you see what I'm
it can
saying?
be it can be both of those, but it can also be even deeper than that. So, like, you were at work and you felt disrespected by your boss. And then you get in the car and you get cut off and you feel disrespected again. And so then you bring all those. But it could also be that there's a pattern of feeling disrespected in your life and noticing, like, because our brains make up stories to make sense of things that happen to us. And so, regardless of whether it's true or not, your brain is going to create a story. And so, when you have that story and you accept it and believe it, then it becomes a core belief. And so, like, if I'm always getting disrespected, every time you get disrespected, then it's going to just reinforce that belief, when that may or may not be actually what's happening, right? And so you always have to challenge those core beliefs to make sure that you're like, is that really what's going on here? Or am I like distorting it because I have built this basically a grievance file for that belief?
Yeah, I'll add to that as well. There's a process I go through, and let me say it this way. This is something I take my clients through. It builds, and so I'll give the full structure. But let me just preface it by saying, even just doing one or two layers is immensely helpful. Okay,
Hmm.
so for myself, for clients, whenever I'm having a bad day, it's usually because there's some type of event or series of events that have gone on in my day that makes it a difficult day. I'll take the event and then I'll try to attach to it what is the feeling that comes from that, the emotion. And we just got done saying, hey, like labeling emotion is important, and if it stays at the anger, frustration, anxiety, fear level, that means we got to dig a little bit deeper, go one more level, and say, okay, when this happened, I felt afraid of failure or afraid of rejection. Okay. And if you can just do that, that's huge, right? We just got done saying that can bring immediate relief. But if you add another layer and move into this is the messaging, this is the thought, right? So we're going from emotion to thought now. And it makes me think that I'm not good enough. It makes me think that I'm gonna be found out as an imposter, something along those lines, right? And that structure gives you more nuance. If you want to go another layer in there, what Laura's talking about, I'm thinking of are the narratives, which is the theme. Like these are things where I felt in before in my past, where I felt not enough, or I felt like I was an imposter. Growing up, I felt that way on the basketball team, or whatever. Right? There are these themes that are present throughout life, where it goes from just a singular event of the day to something maybe much larger throughout the patterns of our life. Right? And so if you can just break it down into that structure from event to a feeling to a thought to an overall theme, that gives you a very nuanced, very broken down understanding of what's going on within you. And again, if we're just all we're doing is labeling, we haven't even like done any repair on this stuff. But being able to know what it is and where it's coming from is immensely helpful just from the regulation standpoint, right? And so again, that there's a lot of steps in there. But if you break down and add in those layers one by one, I think that goes a long way towards helping us know how to cope better with anything that might come throughout our day.
That's really helpful because I've been, even in conflict situations, we've often been taught, oh, tell the other person, when you did this, I felt fill in the blank. But what I hear y'all saying is part of the regulation, the internal work that you can do, that each of us can do, is when we feel angry or when we feel shameful, whatever we're feeling, is just to step back a little bit and ask ourselves, when this happened, I felt, and then you're not telling anyone. This is just for yourself, right?
It's all internal. Yep.
I felt this, and try to go beyond sad or just beyond anger. Just go a little bit deeper. I felt this because I thought this, right? Because I thought I'm an imposter, or I thought, and then it sounds like maybe their advanced degree work is now try to trace some patterns. Are there larger narratives or themes that we have held on to that inform these thoughts and common emotions? So I wanted to point that out because I think it is a little different from what most of us have heard. It's like you're encouraging us to do that work first to kind of get just a lay of the land, and that's going to help with regulation.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of times when you have a bad day, it's like you had a bad day at work and you're transitioning back to home, or something happened at home before you left and you're trying to transition to work. But building in that pause, I think, especially if you're in by yourself in the car, building in a pause before you enter a new space and evaluating, is there anything I need to leave behind? Is there anything that's going on with me right now that I need to evaluate before I enter this space? I try really hard to do this, especially when I'm coming home from a long day of doing therapy. My husband will walk out and I'm still sitting in the car and he's like, "Are you coming in?" I'm not quite yet.
Same here. I'll do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you have to kind of like lay it down, right? And so when I'm doing well, when I'm at my more capable coping, I will take a good pause in the car. If I'm not, I may just jump right out of the car, run inside the house, and then I may bring some trash with me, right? That I haven't cleared out yet. Pauses are so important and transitions are so important. So thinking about how you can build in pauses and transitions can be great. I know, like when I had little kids and I always had them in the car with me, that's harder to do, but do it with them.
That's so good. That makes me think a little bit about, we talked about this beforehand as we were prepping for this, the example that Christ set for us, right? We all, those of us who grew up in church know the story, right? On the night before he was betrayed and went to the cross, he does something that's a little bit unusual. He gathers like 2 or 3 of his friends and he says, come away with me and pray. And it's like the middle of the night. And of course, the disciples all fall asleep and he's just praying and he's like crying out to his Father. He's sweating blood drops because it's so intense. And, my takeaway is not, oh, pray when you're under duress or like, oh, look at Jesus. He prayed when he was stressed out. Oh, of course, Jesus did that. I think what strikes me is that if you look at his life, all the days leading up to that, this was his pattern. This was his practice. He had built up this habit of withdrawing and going to pray to his Heavenly Father, and then he'd come back. And he just does that over. And the writers make it very explicit, this practice that Jesus cultivated. And I think then for myself and what I want to share with the listeners, which you guys are touching upon, is if we wait until our bad days to try to develop a practice to deal with our emotions, it's too late. And so what we need to do is we need to develop the habits to process our emotions on our good days so that we have something to lean back on when the bad days happen. So there's this practice, and I'm getting ready, and now, oh man, today sucked. But I've been practicing a pause for the last few years. And so now I don't have to unleash it on my family or whoever happens to be in my way. Oh, this is a really hard circumstance, but I've been practicing doing gratitude exercises, and now I can reframe my mind in this really hard situation. I can refocus. So I know you and Lee, you had mentioned a little bit some of those. We had talked about some of what are some of those practices that can sustain healthy processing of emotions.
Yeah, first let me go back and just say I appreciate the integration of just what that looks like from a spiritual discipline standpoint. Even that exercise that I laid out there in terms of like the event, the thought, and the feeling, there is embedded, at least for me, a very just a very intimate act with the Lord and the Holy Spirit in that space where, like, once I identify the feeling and the underlying belief, it's something that I have found submitting that to God is part of the act of regulation and healing, right? And so it's so this gets a little bit further into not just labeling, identifying, but what do we do with it, right? And so I know just from my own rhythms, that's an essential exercise because it will allow me to be able to dig down deep and find out what is this really about for me. And once I do, it is something that I feel like is a necessary component to take another step to say, okay, what does it look like to submit that to the Lord, right? And to receive truth from Him, right? So I just want to add that as well. The other thing that comes to my mind as you're talking about that, as you're referencing Jesus in these moments throughout Scripture where He kind of just seals away and prays to His Father, I have felt like this entire process many times feels very much like a cadence of like this hygienic process where it's not just something like as you said, John, it's not something that we just do when it's necessary or when something really significant comes up. But if we have a rhythm and a pattern around doing this, it feels like to me emotionally, mentally, spiritually hygienic work. Right. So when I mean hygienic, it's like all throughout our day, we're going to have things that happen. There are going to be things that will sting us, things that will wound us. And I think of it in the visual imagery I have in my mind is that we'll just have these things that like will attach to us, right? We'll have these things that will come upon us and that they'll stick with us. And it's the daily activity of being able to hygienically release those things and to cleanse ourselves from those things. And think of it this way, if we don't do that, these events that pile up, they just continue to stick to us and we just become emotionally, relationally unhygienic. And who wants to be around someone who's not taking care of themselves, right? And so that's part of my job and my goal as an individual, as a husband, as a father, as a leader to work on cleansing those things on a daily rhythm so that they don't build up and cause problems down the line, and become much bigger than they need to be, right? So I'll just add that as part of the patterns that when we think about what Jesus did, I think of it like he's doing he's doing hygienic work of just connecting and releasing a lot of those things and giving them unto the Lord.
As you were saying that, I was thinking of like letting yourself get emotionally smelly.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's a thing.
You
Yeah.
really stink right now.
You're emotionally horribly smelly.
I mean, we all are like either we've been that or we know people like that, like where you can
Oh,
feel
for
they're just not
sure.
taking care of themselves and you feel it, right? You sense it. So I would say yeah,
Yeah.
it's fitting.
Yeah. Yeah. And usually it lashes out at people that had nothing to do with the why
That's
you're
right.
like that, right? You lash out at like even a grocery store clerk because you're just carrying so much. And I think that idea, but I think I want to kind of normalize that too. We're all going to get that way sometimes. That's not, you can't maintain a completely clean emotional state all the time because the world is the way it is, right? And so noticing when you're starting to like gather that up and carrying more and more with you, I think can be something. And you usually notice it when you do something, you're like, oh God, why did I do that? That was horrible, right? And so trying to build in those pauses to notice it earlier, but also being kind to yourself when you don't and saying, oh, I need to do some work and I need to back up from.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I think that's another theme that we hope just runs through this entire podcast and the tenor of our conversations. That as we grow in awareness, there's going to be stuff we're like, ugh, and that's a natural reaction. But let's encourage each other to practice kindness to ourselves and to others. That would be a very good thing. Our group, we have a very strong commitment to support leaders. And I wonder if the two of y'all, if there's anything that you want to say specifically to people who are leading others or who have influence over others about this topic.
Yeah, I'll say this because I think we just touched upon that a little bit in terms of just the need for that hygienic work. I feel like leaders just get so much more junk on them than anyone else. There's just a lot more exposure there. And when I say leaders, I'm going to expand that window because I think we're all leaders in different ways. Like, I think if you're a parent, you're a leader, right? And
absolutely.
And that probably resonates more with most of our listeners than anything else, that in those moments, your emotions and your exposure is so high because you're evaluating yourself. You're being evaluated by your kids. There's a consistent level of, all the emotions of am I enough? Am I failing at this? Am I doing it right? And so for leaders, whether it's in your family or in an organization you're leading or a church, the exposure rate that you have is so much higher. And that increases the need to find healthy rhythms where you can do this hygienic cleansing work, and to do it for yourself and do it in community connection with other people, to find support mechanisms. I think as a leader, I think it's just hard because we think that we have to be able to do it on our own or that we shouldn't have to do this, right? And I think that's the actual kind of insidious thing about this whole thing when it comes to leaders, is that it's this trap that we get ourselves into, that we cannot do this activity or we shouldn't do this activity. And it actually makes it much more difficult for us as leaders, right? So that's what I would say.
Yeah. And I think it's so important for leaders to model that they're not always okay. Right. To be able to say, I think that's one thing that I really appreciate when I first started working with Lee, was how open and honest he was about his own struggles, and really helped me to kind of put down my perfectionism side of myself and say it's okay for me to like be vulnerable with people that I'm leading and let them know when I'm having bad days and let them know when things are not quite right with me, so that they can come alongside me, they can pray for me. And it also lets them know that when they're in that same position, they can do that as well. Because if you're always perfect to your team, they're like, well, can I be imperfect with them, right?
I see the time and we're about out of time, so we're going to wrap up here. This is a great conversation, and I'm sitting with a lot of the things you shared, and we'll continue to reflect on them. And I hope our listeners do the same. I wanted to close with the words of a very well-known children's book. We all have terrible, horrible, no good, very bad days. Those are inevitable. What isn't inevitable is how we deal with those days. And I think our hope through this podcast and these conversations, the work that we get to do, that you all get to do as therapists, is to help people learn more constructive ways of handling and dealing with their emotions. That it doesn't have to result in disconnection and rupture to the people we love and care about, or even our own integrity or our relation with God. But there is a maturing process that can happen, that over time, as we practice regulation, as we practice good hygiene, that we can learn to be in more touch with our emotions and learn to work through those in healthier ways. So thank you all for listening today. And so we want to end just with this blessing. May God go with you. May God bless you and strengthen you as you do the work. Thanks. Thanks for tuning in to The Work Within. We hope this show blessed you in some way. Please subscribe and leave us a review. Your support means a lot to us. Finally, if you're looking for a therapist, we'd love to help. Visit us at www.watershedinitiative.com to get started. For a limited time, new clients can receive 10% off their first 5 sessions of therapy by mentioning The Work Within. Join us again next time.